Welcome back to EducateMe MD. I'm Dr. Sarah Soltz, a general pediatrician, and today we will discuss how screen use affects the minds and bodies of teens and young adults. We will delve into the brain to see what changes are important and which are just hype. I will go into uncommon depth on common topics to explain the ordinary in a new way, so please join us. Greetings, I'm Dr. Sarah Soltz, and last week I discussed how screen time changes the brains and behavior of young kids, and today I want to expand that discussion to teenagers and young adults. Smartphones, watches, and computers can be super helpful devices, but as we have seen, they can also be highly addictive. For a lot of teens, it's a safe place, but there can also be so much risk to overall health that we may not even recognize until much later. I've created this episode for teens, parents, grandparents, and educators, and those who just want to know more about how to find a healthy balance with screens. I want to mention that it would be helpful to watch my prior episode before this one to fully understand the science. So I'm going to use a different format today, and I'll start with a quick question and answer to present the most important points of this issue and then explain each of the questions in more detail. Let's begin. What is the problem? Kids are using devices too much, and it's affecting their sleep, their learning, their social interactions, and ultimately their health, both physical and mental. I realize this is a strong position to take, and I did try to approach this topic with an unbiased perspective, but the more I research it, the more strongly I feel this is true. So, are devices really the cause, or is it just parents and psychologists blaming the most recent new technology? I would say devices are not the whole cause of these issues or our current health crisis, but definitely a big part of it. More and more research is being done on this topic and consistently shows that the more we become dependent on devices for pleasure and social interactions, and then the more problems we have. This seems to be truer for teens than adults, but both are affected. Why is this happening? The short answer is devices are too easy and too available. Smartphone use triggers dopamine, which is a chemical made in your brain for anticipating a reward. And intermittent rewards, like frequency of interactions on social media, scrolling videos, and video games, are the most addictive. When we get used to a dopamine release from the instant gratifications of games or videos, it's harder for our brains to get as much of a dopamine release from non-screen activities, like a walk outside or hanging out with friends, and our brain becomes trained to want the effects from the screens more than real life. How do we figure out if someone has a problem? Most people with a smartphone could benefit from thinking about if they can use their device in a healthier way. Some behaviors that might indicate a problem are decreasing grades, sleep, physical activity, being crowded out by their phone use, avoiding in-person social interactions, seeking comfort from a device when stressed, or being emotionally withdrawn. If you think you or your child might have a problem, there are questionnaires, both online and on paper, that can help to see if you're at risk. There is a link to one in this image that's called the Smartphone Addiction Screen, or SAS, and there's also a link to a site by the AAP with a paper form called the Prius that has either a 3-question or an 18-question options. And if you do decide to take that or give it to your kids and you notice there might be an issue, it's something you could take with you to the doctor's office to help start a discussion on that. Also, I want you to take a moment to think about how you're using your phone. Does it keep you from doing other things you want to do or from sleeping? Does your phone or device make you feel fulfilled or not? So what should you do? If you already know you or your child have a problem, or if the results from the test above show you do, then you could try some of the tips below, or you can ask your doctor for help or seek out a counselor. This is especially important if you feel you or your child are dealing with deeper issues such as anxiety or depression. There are studies that show when both a parent and their child have depression and the parent gets help or treatment, the child often gets better without treatment. There are also changes that can be made on a bigger scale in communities or governments, like the no cell phones in school law that was discussed in a prior episode. I'll give more ideas on this later, too. Obviously, how we use screens is just one part of what makes us healthy or unhealthy, but we can't fix everything at once, and looking at the data, technology is a big contributor. So let's dive into each of these questions a little deeper. So back to the first question, which is, what is the problem? The first iPhone was created in 2007 and the first iPad in 2010. And there were no laws on safe use, no lectures about possible risks, and it definitely benefited the creators to have people spend as much time on them as possible. It's like when cars were first created back in the 1920s, even earlier, people were so impressed with the new technology and everyone wanted one, but no one thought about the risks. And it wasn't until 40 years later in the 1960s that the first seatbelt laws were created. Anyways, back to phones. By 2013, over 50% of consumers had a smartphone. So from 2007, first one was created, to 2013, more than half of people, as an incredibly fast adoption of technology. This led to a wild west of new games, apps, and a constant connection to the internet that's never happened before. Some college professors started noticing that more college students seemed to be struggling, especially with anxiety. Jonathan Haidt is a professor at New York University who wrote a book called The Anxious Generation, and he said that as many as 2/3 of students on a college campus responded to surveys they did that they were worried most or half the time. So 2/3 were worried most or half the time. And that was according to a 2023 study, and the level of students diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder in 18 to 25-year-olds jumped 139% since 2010. This is the first group of the Gen Z generation to grow up with consistent internet and cell phones to go to college. Consider this quote from Mr. Haidt. People don't get depressed when they face threats collectively. They get depressed when they feel isolated, lonely, or useless. The way technology contributed to this shift in mental health is also well documented in a book called iGen by Jean Twenge, which has the very appropriate tagline, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, and what that means for the rest of us. Unfortunately, this same problem of mental health disorders has affected younger teens as well, and in 2020, national databases showed that girls 10 to 14 years old harmed themselves 188% more often than in 2010. As I researched this trend of more anxiety, depression, and self-harm, another issue that has contributed to teens' lack of resiliency often comes up. The helicopter parenting and overscheduling of kids' activities. This excessive concern for safety and need to control kids' lives has led to less freedom to play alone with other kids and less unstructured play for young kids. I often hear adults reminisce about how we used to play outside every day until the sun went down, and statistics support that there has been a dramatic shift. In the 1970s and early 80s, 1 in 4 kids spent most of their time inside. And now that's flipped to 3 in 4 kids spend most of their time inside. This combination of a need to keep our kids safe from any possible harm and the rapid acceptance of the internet was a dangerous combination. I did not expect this topic to take me down the pathway of generational changes and culture shifts, but to fully understand the issue of smartphones, I felt I needed to put it in the context of the bigger picture. The authors I have mentioned have done a great job of articulating this problem, and if this interests you, then I highly recommend reading some of their work. My next question, with the highlights above, was, why is this happening? So I've touched on this answer from a cultural perspective, but biologically it's a continuation of what I discussed last episode. The changes that were seen in the MRI scans of the brain continue to be seen in teens and young adults. The cortical thinning in critical areas of speech development and problem solving and thickening in certain visual areas are more consistent on scans. I found some interesting research that links those areas that are affected in the brain to the known pathways of dopamine. I mentioned dopamine above, and to recap, it's a neurotransmitter or chemical that's getting a lot of attention recently, especially in the addiction and behavior type research. Dopamine can be created in the brain from an amino acid called L-tyrosine, which is a basic building block of proteins. So if we have enough protein in our diet, we should be able to make plenty of dopamine. We know dopamine is released in anticipation of a fun or pleasurable activity and makes us feel happy and increases our focus and motivation. Not to get too technical, but dopamine is created in a portion in the very center of the brain called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, as well as a couple of other spots, and then it's transferred by neurons to other areas of the brain and body. As you can see in this picture, one of the first places it goes after being released from the VTA is the frontal lobe, or the portion of the brain in the front closest to the forehead. And the more specific medical term you may hear for this area is the prefrontal cortex. This area has consistently shown it's not fully developed until people reach their mid-20s, and it's responsible for what's called executive function. This includes planning and executing tasks and helping to limit impulsive behavior. As a side note, there are some interesting stories about people with known frontal lobe dysfunction and the crazy behaviors that they engage in. Basically, the working theory is that the effects of excessive dopamine released in the brain from non-essential tasks, like scrolling videos, is thought to structurally change the prefrontal cortex in ways that prevent kids from developing confidence in their actions, and then they don't have the impulse control to stop the vicious cycle. This is one reason why the effects of screens are greater in teens than in adults, because this area of the brain is slow to fully develop. Another reason is because adults have more essential tasks to do on their phones, such as checking work email, making lists, planning trips, etc., that do not have the same effect on dopamine. So to bring this discussion around to social media, the creation of the like button on Facebook and Instagram is one small feature that's shown to have very significant effects. This little button is what changed the social media sites from a place to connect with old friends to a competition of who could post the best and most popular content, and allowed teens to compare their number of likes with their peers. A surprisingly well-done study published in 2022 by McCarran and colleagues used U.S. national data during the time of the staggered rollout of Facebook in the mid-2000s. Basically, Facebook wasn't released everywhere all at once, and so they showed that with the implementation of Facebook on certain campuses that the rates of anxiety and things went up. I say this is a surprising study because it is retrospective, which is not usually considered the strongest data, but given this unique time frame, they could pinpoint the changes on one campus compared to another. They estimated that Facebook alone caused a 9% increase in depression and a 12% increase in generalized anxiety disorder, and overall contributed to about 25% of the increase of new cases of major depressive disorder from 2004 to 2019. So there are so many topics I could touch on to explain why this is happening and the effects it has on our society, but I just want to mention a few more very briefly. One is the decreased sleep due to time on devices past bedtime or in the middle of the night. It not only affects mood and focus, but brain development and amplifies other mental health problems. There's a lot of data on these changes that I plan to discuss more another time. Another important study is a large meta-analysis done in Britain in 2023 showed that frequent use of social media, more than 2 hours a day, was associated with poor diet, increased alcohol, tobacco, and drug use, as well as increased sexual risk behavior and antisocial behavior. There are even studies that took the opposite approach and said if we limit teens' screen use during their free time for 2 weeks, will their mood improve? And guess what? It did. So more media use is associated with more family conflict, and the National Institute of Health is working with psychiatric groups to research this issue and to create diagnostic criteria for a possible smartphone addiction diagnosis. At this point, as far as your doctor would diagnose or see this issue, there is a newer term, problematic smartphone use, that's being used some, but it would basically be classified as a behavioral addiction. But usually is just considered the trigger for other psychiatric diseases. Now I want to move on to more constructive conversations about what can be done to improve this dismal picture that I have painted. If you haven't yet given your child their own device, wait until 13, although there are some people that say it's not so much the age as how you do it, and having a clear plan and expectations in place at the start instead of trying to put those in place later can make a big difference. Also, if kids do have to wait till they're a little bit older, but everybody's doing it, then it's more of a cultural shift and other kids don't feel as left out. It makes sense that if we set limits when kids are young or avoid use altogether, then it does not become a consistent part of their life and identity, and we can avoid those early brain changes. Remember the screen time limits from before. None under 2 years old, 1 hour a day until 5 or less if possible, and no more than 2 hours a day when over 5 years old. This time should often be supervised and enjoyed together to monitor content and discuss issues that arise. If kids learn how to identify unhealthy content and can talk openly about what they have found or seen, then they will have better self-regulation. Try not to judge or be dismissive of all content or things you may think are pointless, like watching other people play video games, but to encourage your child to try some of the things they may have seen, assuming it's safe. One thing I did not discuss last time was how to have a conversation with your child about this. In general, avoid yes or no questions unless your child is unable to give an answer to open-ended ones. If you train them how to evaluate their thoughts and feelings when they're young, they'll be easier as they get older and they'll know you're a safe person to discuss things with. For young kids, simple questions like, what did you enjoy about that video? Or more specifically, would you have made the same decision that child did? For older kids or teens, start with a question that engages with the content they are watching. Have you seen any funny videos recently? And then you could even let them know that you saw this episode and were wondering if they've ever thought about how they feel when they're on social media. Does it make them happy, frustrated, feeling left out? When they answer, ask them why they feel that way. Cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, is a well-established form of therapy to help people of all ages identify where their feelings and mood may differ from a healthy baseline. And then it identifies steps on how to determine where it deviated and how to help them come into alignment. As a parent, you can do some basic CBT by asking questions about how your child feels and why. Then ask them if they think others feel the same way or what they could do to change the way they feel. If there are more serious concerns about extreme feelings of sadness, anxiety, or self-harm, then it's important to seek additional help from a doctor or certified counselor. It's important not to get mad, but to work together to come up with a plan that you both agree to and reasonable consequences if the plan is not followed. I'll post one more link on the screen with some more ideas of questions you can ask your kids. So some of the tips from my last video were also to eat one non-screen meal together per day, to get outside daily, ideally for as much time as they spend on a screen, to keep devices out of bedrooms and have a consistent bedtime, and to make a family media plan with the resources on the AAP website. I still feel all of these apply to teens and even college students and adults. Having any plan has shown to help, so taking an hour or two to make that plan can have huge benefits, even if you don't feel you're doing it right. Consider setting downtime at night and limits on certain problematic apps like social media or games. When doing research for this episode, I was surprised how high my score was on the SAS questionnaire, and I decided to follow some of their tips, and I changed my phone to grayscale as well as set downtime and a 1 hour limit on games. It's been helpful to follow what I know I want to do anyways, and shows my kids that I am setting the same limits for myself as for them. This last section was obviously geared more towards adults or parents, but I hope any teens listening will understand that they can take these same tips and institute them too. It may seem frustrating at first, or you may not think you need to decrease your screen time. Here's one exercise you can do. Take a minute and set one goal that you want to achieve in the next week, and one goal for the next month. It could be anything that would make your life better. You want to run faster in your sport. You want to improve your math grades, sleep better at night, get along better with your siblings. Now write it down. Yes, you can use a note in your phone if you don't have pen or paper, or send a text to yourself. Now, think about what is one change you can make to achieve that goal. Run an extra mile each morning, go for math tutoring after school, avoid caffeine after lunch, invite your sibling to do an activity you both like, The end result is hopefully that you'll find a way to feel better, and while doing these other activities, you may end up spending less time on your phone. Another good resource is a book called Dopamine Detox by Thibaut Maurice, with the tagline, "A short guide to remove distractions and get your brain to do hard things." So consider this quote from the book. "Constantly escaping reality due to fleeting satisfactions will not fulfill you. It will not make you feel love, connection, or a sense of purpose. Don't give in to the superficial activities that give a quick dopamine fix. You have to remind your brain that it can get dopamine from healthy social interactions and outdoor activities." It's important to remember that different times of year will require different expectations. In our family, we have to rediscuss our plan and expectations during transitions at the beginning of summer or the beginning of a new school year. We usually try to hold to the rule of no screen time on school nights, except as needed for schoolwork, of course. So far, I've just been talking about things you can do at home, but it's also important to think about how we can make changes that will make things easier and safer for our kids by making laws that affect our whole society. We need to call on our leaders to help protect our children, or at least support and vote for those laws if they come to a vote. I wanted to give an update on the new law in Texas to ban cell phones in schools. We are now a few weeks into school, and my son told me that there was a petition with over 130,000 signatures to reverse the law, mostly signed by teens and their parents, which I think shows some of the strong feelings teens have about disconnecting from their phones. Personally, I've heard the most complaints from older teens who are very used to using their cell phones throughout the day, as opposed to middle schoolers where they may have been more restricted in the past already. I do not see this as a need to change the law, but to help kids adapt to a healthier environment. I've also had several mom friends comment about how they didn't realize how much they texted their child during the day, so I think the law may also help create limits when we may not have realized they were needed. Now I want to shift to laws about online games or social media. Right now, very few laws have been made to limit access for minors, and this has led to significant problems of inappropriate online interactions and abuse. Currently, kids are required to be 13 years old or older to have an account, but there's often no verification needed to prevent them from using a false date of birth or sometimes even from having multiple accounts. And this could make it easier for them to hide questionable activity from their parents and put kids more at risk of accessing content inappropriate for their age. I have heard the recommendation to change the law to 16 or even 18 with appropriate verification required, and I fully support that. And I do think some companies are starting to go in that direction. This would force families that may not have heard about the above concerns to wait until kids are at a slightly more mature age to be able to handle the content they are seeing. This would include apps like Facebook and Instagram, but also Roblox and YouTube. As I've been researching this topic, I found a lot of great resources to help families on both a personal level and a community level. I find this so encouraging and hope we can reverse some of the anxiety and depression that has skyrocketed in the past decade. Some programs to check out are the Let Go Project. This is probably geared towards a little bit younger kids, but could be valuable for teens as well. And it's a program to allow kids more individual responsibility and freedom, both at home and at school, in a more structured way. Design It For Us is an organization started by teenagers to advocate for safer digital spaces. And for kids in high school, more shop classes and CTE programs, or career technical education is what those stand for, ones where they could get certifications in culinary or EMT, pharmacy, a lot of these different programs. And they allow more hands-on activities and opportunities to discover different careers. So we should allow kids to be bored and see what they do. Allow them to make a big mess and then teach them how to clean up thoroughly. These are the life lessons many kids are not learning, and they're surprisingly necessary for healthy development. I challenge you to think of one change you can make today for yourself or a child. Is it to set a limit on a particular game or app, or to set a downtime in the evening? Is it to create a phone-free space or a new schedule in your house to make cooking and chores at home more evenly divided? Feel free to comment with your email if you'd like a copy of my handout with more tips or changes you can make at school and at home. In conclusion, we need to actively engage with this issue. Set clear guidelines for your family, monitor content, and push for community changes that would help protect all kids. If we can do this, we can make our world happier and healthier. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Disclaimer is the information contained in this podcast is strictly informational, and even though I am a doctor, I am not your doctor, and you should always consult with your own healthcare team before making significant changes to your care. Thank you.